Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. Recently, a user on my Discord server asked, "Hey man, can you do a general sound design video for beginners?" And I said, "Of course I can, man with a strange accent. Of course I can." And so, that is what this video is going to be about. So stay tuned. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the basics of subtractive synthesis. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is subtractive synthesis? Basically, subtractive synthesis is a method of sound design where you take a sound and remove or subtract frequencies using a filter to shape a new sound. The sound can then be further shaped using envelopes, filters, and effects. This is the most common form of synthesis and is what most analog or virtual synthesizers use. So the first thing that I'm going to go over is oscillators. Now I'm going to be using Serum in this video, but you can pretty much follow along with any synthesizer that you may have. So what is an oscillator? Basically, an oscillator is a sound generator that generates one of a few different waveforms, and the most fundamental waveform is the sine wave. Now the sine is a very pure tone that in music is one of the, it's pretty much what you can take a sine wave, and if you combine them all together at the right frequency and the right volume, you can create literally any sound just by stacking sine waves. That's pretty much how fundamental a sine wave is. And this is what a sine wave sounds like all by itself. So what I'm going to do is go by oscillators, starting from the least harmonically rich to what in my mind would be the most harmonically rich as far as these basic shapes go. So the next one I'm going to move up to is this triangle wave, and a triangle wave is just like a sine wave, only there's more harmonics. So if we listen to what this triangle wave sounds like and we look at it here on the signal analyzer, we'll see that you've got the fundamental tone, which is what is right here. You got your fundamental, followed by these upper harmonics, which makes the sound more complex. So like I said, you can take a sine wave, and if you combine enough sine waves in each of those frequencies and at those differing volumes, then you would have a triangle wave. Alright, the next one I'm going to go to is a square, also called a pulse wave, which sounds like this. Now on most synthesizers you'll have the option to modulate the pulse width of the square or pulse wave, and so I can't really do it on this one. It'll just kind of do like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly change to this. So this is a square. It's a bit different than the other one, but it's still a square. So you'll see here now that I can modulate or move the pulse width. So you'll notice that this line here in the middle will move and become thinner. And that's a technique that you can use to make your sound more complex by making that pulse width move or modulate as the sound goes on. And the last waveform that I'm going to touch on is the saw wave. And you'll see that this is a very harmonically rich sound, and here's what it sounds like. And those are your most basic, most common waveforms. So let's move on to envelopes. Now, an envelope is another part of a subtractive synthesizer. Different synths have a different number of envelopes that you can use. For example, Serum has 3 envelopes, whereas my Roland Juno 106 only has 1 envelope. An envelope is most commonly made up of 4 parts: your attack, decay, sustain, and release, also called ASDR. So let's walk through each of these. Envelope 1 is routed by default to control the volume. So listen to what happens to the volume each time I move one of these knobs. I'm going to start on the attack. As I move the attack up, listen to what happens. The volume faded in slower and slower as I moved the knob up. Next, I'm going to kind of talk about decay and sustain in tandem because they kind of go along with each other. So listen to what happens. When I turn the sustain down, I'm going to turn it all the way down, and I've got the decay set just on the normal 1 second here. And you'll notice the ramp goes down. And so what's going to happen is the volume is going to start at the very top, at the very loudest, and completely fade out. Alright, now let's say I have the sustain at about midway here. Instead of falling all the way out, it's gonna just kind of stop right in the middle. So it'll fade out a little bit, but it won't go all the way down. And with the decay, I can set it to where that sustain will start shorter at a shorter time after the initial key comes on or later. So as I move the decay up and back, you'll notice the sound when the decay was higher, it took longer to get to that sustain point, or when it was shorter, it took a shorter amount of time to get to that sustain point. Now I'm going to move to release. The release controls what happens after you take your hand off a key. So when I hit the key now, it starts and it stops for however long I have my finger on the note. So if I want to have it slowly fade out even after my finger's off the key, I can turn the release up. And that's what that does. So when you put those all together, you can do whatever you want to do. And that is the envelope. Let's move on to filters. A filter is a sound shaping tool which allows you to roll off frequencies of a sound. There are 3 types of filters you will most commonly see on a synth: low pass, high pass, and band pass. A low pass filter will allow you to roll off higher frequencies. So as we play the sound and I move the cutoff knob down, listen to what happens to the sound. As you can see, the higher frequencies were taken out as I moved the cutoff down. As I move from a 12 decibel low pass to a 24 decibel low pass, it will be even more pronounced. So watch what happens now. You can tell that the frequencies rolled off a lot more sharply than with the 12 decibel low pass. A high pass filter does just the opposite. A high pass filter will take and roll off frequencies starting from the bottom. So listen to what happens to the sound as I move the cutoff knob up. The lower frequencies were being rolled off as I moved the cutoff knob up. A band pass filter will take and roll off a little bit from the high and a little bit from the low and leave you with a narrow band of frequencies in the middle. So listen to what happens as I move the cutoff knob. You can hear that there were a band of frequencies just left in the middle, while low bits and high bits were removed. Now let's talk about this resonance knob. What resonance does is sort of creates a peak right where the cutoff is. So as I move the cutoff down, I'm going to move it down to right here, and then I'm going to pick this resonance knob up. And you'll see there's this peak right here. Now when I play this sound, you'll notice that the area where that peak is, the frequencies are a little bit more pronounced. As I move this resonance knob up, it's going to be really pronounced. And so you can see over here where that peak is, and you can see that that area just really spikes. In some synthesizers, if you turn the resonance knob all the way up, it will actually generate a sine tone. That's called a self-oscillating filter. And you can use that to make some really interesting sounds. I'm not going to go over what the drive, fat, mix, and pan knobs do. You're not really going to see any of those on most synthesizers, so I'm just going to kind of disregard those. Next, I'm going to go over the LFO. Now, LFO stands for Low Frequency Oscillator. An LFO is used to modulate parameters of a synth, such as the pitch, filter cutoff, volume, and other stuff. LFOs generally have the same basic options, such as the option to retrigger on each new note, the option to sync to your tempo, and a rate control. Some will allow you to draw in the shape of your LFO, such as the one here in Serum, or it will have a few basic waveform shapes for you to choose from. So to demonstrate the LFO, what I'm going to do is turn on the filter and place the LFO on the cutoff. Now I have it set to retrigger. I also have it synced to my tempo, which is at 130 beats per minute, and I also have the rate set to 1/4, which means that every beat it starts over. So listen to how this sounds. You can hear that as the LFO moves, it's controlling the cutoff, so where it starts at the bottom, goes up, and comes back down, and it repeats. Okay? So what I can do here is just draw in some random stuff here. I'm just gonna point and click and just, I don't even know, just see what this sounds like. And I mean, you can go crazy, especially with this LFO, where it allows you to just draw in whatever kind of shape you want. And I'm just gonna turn off the BPM. I'll turn off the trigger here, and I'm just gonna let it go crazy. I mean, that just sounded like I let off a massive fart, but I mean, you know, like I said, you can do whatever you want to. Maybe if I go a little slower, it might sound a little bit more interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I could do something with that. But that is the LFO. The last thing that I'm going to go over is unison. Unison is where two or more oscillators are generated, but slightly detuned from one another to create a fatter sound. You could use 2 oscillators and detune them slightly, or you could take 16 oscillators and detune them a lot. It all depends on whatever kind of sound you're trying to make. So let me demonstrate unison for you. Right now we've got 1 saw being generated, and if I take it and put 2, now we've got 2, and they're both detuned from each other. You can see these 2 lines represent each oscillator and how far apart detuned they are. So here's how it sounds now. Now, if we go all the way up to, say, 8, and we leave it where it's detuned now, it's going to sound a little bit more musical, as opposed to just having the 2 oscillators being detuned from each other. So listen to how it sounds now. Alright, and a lot of times, actually back when, you know, trance and hardstyle, they would use these really detuned unisons and just really go crazy. So I'm going to put this all the way up to 16, and I've got it detuned a little bit more here, and listen to how this sounds. It's a pretty cool sound. I've essentially just written a hook to some new trance or hardstyle song right there. Don't steal that. Or do, whatever. I can't stop you. But anyway, that's unison. So let's take all of what we've learned so far and let's put it all together and make a sound from scratch. I'm thinking I want to make a bass sound, just a simple bass sound. So what I'm going to do is turn on 2 oscillators here, and I'm going to choose a pulse waveform. Okay, and what I'm going to do is take the pulse width of one of them and make it to where it's probably about 25% on the right and then take the other one and move it to where it's about 75% over. So you got one that's kind of thin on the right side and one that's kind of thin on the left side. Alright, and I'm going to take, because I want it to be fat, I want it to be a fat bass sound. So I'm going to take the octave of oscillator B and put it up by 1, and then I'm going to detune them a little bit from one another. And alright, let's see what we've got so far. Sounds pretty fat, you know, if I do say so myself. It's a pretty fat sound, you know. And let's go ahead and turn on the filter. And I'm going to use envelope 2. I don't want the volume to be controlling as well, so take the decay down to about right there, 500 milliseconds or so. And I'm going to put that on the cutoff and drag this back down, turn it up just a little bit, see what we've got. Okay, now I'm going to use the LFO to get a little movement going. I want to control the pulse width of both of them, but not exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the rate down to, let's see, 0.5 hertz. Sounds good and slow. I don't want it to be super fast or it'll be a little, well, a little harsh. Not really what I'm going for. Anyway, so I'm going to take LFO 1 here. I'm going to put it on the wavetable position of both of them. But what I'm going to do is take it, and the LFO is going to go one way for oscillator A, and it's going to go the opposite direction for oscillator B, in about the same amount. So they're kind of, I guess you could say maybe they're kind of fighting each other, sort of. Anyway, so let's see how this sounds now. Okay. Let's see. Maybe turn out the resonance just a tad. Or maybe not at all. I would say that is a successfully fat bass. And yeah, I would say that's it as well. So I hope you've learned something from this video, and I hope you can take all the information that I've given you here and you know, go and create some of your own interesting and unique sounds. So remember, if you like this video, smash that like button and subscribe and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching.